Hello crafters, this is Yana Smakula for SimonsSTM.com. Welcome back for another Yippee For Yana episode. In today's video, I'm sharing a one-layer ink-blended speech bubbles design. My card is an encouragement one, but this design works well for loads of different occasions and messages. The star of the show today is the speech bubbles stencil from Simon. I love mine. Here I used it to sketch out a speech bubbles background on an A2 card. Well, actually on a piece of scrap paper. I love to use scrap paper for this. This is an old packing list or something like that. I try to recycle things and reuse paper whenever possible. And I simply penciled out the speech bubble outlines onto my paper to give me a guide for my card. There's some ink on this guide as I've already tested it. As you can see, I have various size and shape speech bubbles here, and they all face different directions, creating a background for my card. There are 7 speech bubbles in total. I'm going to use this piece of paper as a guide when creating the same pattern on my card. Here, I have a panel of cream cardstock. I didn't want to have a white background, so I opted to use cream instead. You can also try using other light shades of colored cardstock, but keep in mind that blending ink over colored cardstock can give you different shades of ink. For example, if you ink blend pink over a yellow background, you might end up having an orange result. Just something to keep in mind when you select the background color, cardstock color for your card. This cream paper was pretty neutral in terms of affecting the color of ink I blended on top of it, or not affecting the color of ink that I blended on top. I also have a piece of yellow tape from Spellbinders. You can use any low-tech tape for this. I've created a hinge to use it to make a book with my card panel and my guide. I can open my book and tape the card background piece, the cream cardstock panel, onto my work surface. The background panel is now going to stay put, and I can just close and open my guide piece. So close the guide, grab the stencil, and find the first speech bubble to ink blend. Align the stencil with a penciled outline, and again, use a piece of tape to tape the stencil to the work surface. We need to be able to flip the stencil away from the project, open our book, and flip the stencil back to ink blend that speech bubble in the same spot as on our guide. Next, use more low-tack tape and tape the edges of the stencil and any of the speech bubbles that sit next to the one that we plan to ink blend so that we don't accidentally blend the ink where we don't want it. And this is the basic process you'll need to repeat or follow to ink blend each of the speech bubbles you want to have on your card. And you can ink blend as light or as heavy as you like, remove the tape, reposition the stencil, and continue. Now, the beauty of using a stencil versus using a stamp set with speech bubbles is that with a stencil, we have twice as many speech bubbles as we can use the front or the back of the stencil to have the speech bubble face either direction. Now, the tricky part for me when ink blending this design was not to get any fingerprints or ink smudges on the paper. And to prevent that from happening, you can make sure to clean your stencil between ink applications, and you can also mask wider areas of the background so that no ink goes where it doesn't belong. I used Simon Says Stamp positively saturated inks for this background, and my colors are citrine, surf, peachy, bubblegum, celery, marine, and melon. Now, if you do get unwanted ink on your background, like a little smudge or something, you can try to remove it by using a sanding eraser. I got some ink transfer from the tape, but the mono sanding eraser saved the day, and it helped to get most of the ink off the background. Now, using the stencil, you can also overlap the speech bubbles and create a beautiful continuous background, or ink blend just one bubble for your sentiment for your card. Now, speaking of sentiments, I went with an older stamp set from Simon, the Tiny Words Encouragement set. The messages here, as the name suggests, are tiny in size, but they're very powerful. I didn't want to overwhelm my card with big sentiments, big messages. I wanted to keep the sentiment small, but include several sentiments on the card, and one for each speech bubble. Even the longest messages in this tiny words encouragement stamp set fit well inside the speech bubbles in this stencil. I used my Mini Misty stamping tool to stamp all of the sentiments at once. I placed them one onto each speech bubble, and next I made sure that the positioning was straight on the card. The last thing I wanted was a crooked sentiment after all of that ink blending was done. So I closed the lid of my Misty. I made sure the sentiments were positioned straight. I used VersaFine Onyx Black ink and I stamped my messages. Now I did remove one of the sentiments as it seemed off and I didn't want to risk stamping it, but I did restamp it later to complete this design. And all of these messages, like I said, they're all encouraging, but this design would work just as well for a birthday card. You can have lots of different birthday wishes on these speech bubbles, or this could work for a miss you card or for a congratulations card. So like I said, this design is very adaptive. I adhered this panel onto an A2 top folding card base. This is a one-layer design. I seem to be enjoying one-layer cards lately. And to add a little bit of wow, I embellished my card with some white gems from Spellbinders. I clustered 2 or 3 gems onto each speech bubble, and then I used Barely Arts glue to adhere them in place. Now the gems are self-adhesive, they have a little sticky back to them, but I prefer to be doubly sure and I add a dot of glue to adhere the gems in place. I hope you feel inspired to create. If you make a card inspired by this video, we'd love it if you shared your project online and tagged us on social media. We always enjoy seeing what you make. Thanks so much for joining me today. Love you guys, and I'll see you next time.